All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Review Commission for April 23rd, 2019. So our opening statement here. The Development Review Commission is created to hold public meetings and hearings to provide analysis and recommendations to the City Council regarding general land use policies and applications where the Commission has recommendatory power and to render final decisions on specified applications where the Commission has final decision-making power, including but not limited to all aspects of a proposed and future development. The Development Review Commission recognizes that the creation of a desirable environment throughout the city for residents, business, and industry is a prime requisite for the interdependence of land values, aesthetics, and good site planning by promoting harmonious, safe, attractive, and compatible development that is therefore considered to be in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. Also regarding appeals, if any person aggrieved by final decision of the Development Review Commission, if you are aggrieved, you may file an appeal to the City Council within 14 calendar days after the Development Review Commission has rendered its decision. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's introduce who we have with us tonight. To my left, we have Commissioner Andrew Johnson, Commissioner Phil Amorosi, Commissioner Scott Sumners. I am Chairman David Lyon. To my right is Vice Chair Michael DiDomenico, Commissioner Don Casano, and Commissioner Thomas Brown. From city staff, we have Steve Abramson, we have Dalton Garrett. Oh, wait, hold on. We also have Michelle Swartz is joining us. She will be sitting in on one of our items tonight. And again, for city staff, we have Steve Abrahamson, Dalton Guerra, we have Saparna Dasgupta, Blake Shimke, Karen Stovall. Joining us is Joanna Berry, welcome. And in our audience, we have Ryan Levesque and Chad Weaver. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight, and we have elected to put several of them on the consent agenda. I'll tell you what those are in a second. If you wish to hear any of those, I'm going to give you an opportunity to let us know, and we will hear the case and you can make comment. Otherwise, those items will most likely be approved without further comment. So our consent agenda is the Ascend Church, Priest Green Tree Business Center, B3 Performance, and Tempe Dogs. Also, if you wish to speak on any case tonight, we have some white cards on the table in the back. Please grab one of those and fill it out and bring it up to a member of our city staff here, and they'll get you logged in and you'll get an opportunity to speak for just a little bit on whichever case it is. Oh, there's the first one. All right. So, first order of business then is our meeting minutes that we've considered from the February meeting. We've made a couple of edits. Actually, a good number, thorough editing, Vice Chair DiDomenico. Can I hear a motion regarding the approval of those minutes, please?
So moved.
All right, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded from Commissioner Casano. All in favor by raise of hands, please. Opposed, if any? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Sumners in abstaining. Now we'll move on to our consent agenda. As described, we have Ascend Church, Priest Green Tree Business Center, B3 Performance, and Tempe Dogs. Is there anyone with us that would like to hear one of those cases, or do you just want to see those approved? All right, seeing no complaint, we'll keep those on our consent agenda, and I will hear a motion regarding its approval, please.
I move approval of the consent agenda as read.
All right, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico. Do I hear a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded from Commissioner Don Casano. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. Now we'll move on. We've discussed a slight change to the order as well. I apologize I didn't mention this a little sooner. Thank you for coming if your case has been approved. We'd like to go ahead and hear the Grand at Papago Park Center next. So, Ms. Stovall, if you would grace us with a presentation. I will point out that one of our commissioners has chosen to recuse himself from this case, so we will be joined by Michelle Schwartz. I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. All right. Please, Ms. Stovall.
Good evening. My name is Karen Stovall. Um, the Grand at Papago Park Center is a 58.56 acre mixed-use development located on the south side of Washington between Priest and Parkside Drives. The site is zoned MU4 PAD. The mixed-use development was originally approved in 2013, and at this time, a total of 4 development plan reviews have been approved for it. The applicant is requesting to amend the PAD to modify the previously approved building heights for 8 buildings and parking structures, and to allow alternative parking ratios for the multifamily developments within the PAD. The 2 buildings approved for multifamily are buildings G and F, which are, I know you can't see this, G's in the northeast corner of the site and F is directly west of it. So those are adjacent to Washington Street. And the PAD allows a total of 850 dwelling units, and the applicant's not requesting modification to the number of dwelling units. The applicant is also requesting approval of a development plan review to modify the previously approved landscape plan for building G to eliminate 40 vehicle surface parking spaces. And that DPR can only be approved if the requested alternative parking ratios are approved for the PAD. The PAD restricts areas of the site with building envelopes that begin on the west with 112 feet and on the east end with a maximum of 156 feet. Those maximum heights, as demonstrated with this plan and the PAD, will remain unchanged. The PAD further identifies heights based on building letter, and those are identified with tables in the PAD. The applicant is requesting modification to the height of 8 of those buildings, and the proposed heights or height ranges are identified in the tables with red text. The height ranges are proposed to allow flexibility in the future design of the 8 buildings without the need for a major PAD amendment. The code requires a major PAD amendment for any increase or decrease in the approved plans for height by 10% or more. We have recommended a condition that limits the maximum height of P2 to 27 feet from grade, which would result in a maximum of a 4-level parking structure. I've provided a pretty detailed explanation of the reasoning behind that condition in the staff report, so I won't repeat everything, but I will answer any questions you might have. Regarding the alternative parking ratio for multifamily, the applicant has provided a parking study to justify a parking ratio of 1.51 spaces per dwelling unit. This would result in 123 fewer parking spaces for multifamily than currently required, and staff is in support of that request. If that parking ratio is approved, the development plan review for building G would eliminate 40 vehicle parking spaces from the previously approved DPR plans. On these 2 plans on the screen before you, north is to the right, and the spaces are located on the west side of the development. So there's a small strip here that will no longer be there if the PAD and DPR are approved. So the plan that was approved by the DRC in 2016 is on the left, and on the right shows the eliminated 40 vehicle spaces. Staff is recommending approval of the amended PAD and the DPR subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Commissioner Brown.
These are residential projects, correct?
So,
Structures on the screen? The
so
plan you just showed?
G, this is development for building G. This is the same site. The left one is what was approved in 2016 and shows the row of parking spaces up here that were approved with that plan. The right shows those parking spaces eliminated if the PAD and DPR will be approved. So
Yes,
this is currently under construction.
And this will most directly affect the residential building, correct?
Can you repeat the question?
This will most directly affect those the buildings that I see there, which are residential in nature?
So that is one building, building G, and so that parking is would support building G.
Which is residential?
Correct.
Yes, so my
Multifamily.
question, that's all preamble. My question is, if parking's a problem, and some of these people end up parking in garages that are normally used by offices nearby. This, because I view this as one big building, I know that's probably naive, but one big structure, I'm sorry, one big development. Is that going to be a problem, or are those other buildings closed off to people who don't have a parking, who don't work in the office buildings?
So this entire PAD is under a single ownership. If parking becomes a problem, the developers of the different sites would have to work on something to resolve it. There is actually a shared parking study that was approved with the original 2013 PAD, but that does not include the residential. It mostly included uses on the west end of the site.
So it's only an informal shared use parking, as far as residential crossing over and using, that would be a potential?
That parking study does not address the multifamily parking using parking garages for the non-residential uses.
But you do, but as a staff member, you're supporting this reduction in parking?
Correct. So even though this PAD is directly adjacent to the light rail line and a light rail stop, because the PAD was approved prior to the TOD overlay going into effect, they're complying with the multifamily parking requirements as if this was nowhere near a light rail station.
I understand now.
So yes, we're absolutely supporting the reduction.
Thank you.
All right, other questions for staff? I have one that I'm going to save in case it's not covered. It's a little excitement for us. All right, thank you, Ms. Stovall. We'll invite our applicant to come up and tell us about the project.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. For your record, my name is Manjula Vaz, law firm of Gamage and Burnham. Addresses for the record, 2 North Central, Phoenix 85004. I am here today on behalf of the Papago Park Center and the Grand. I'm just going to start this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mitch Rosen, who's kind of, I don't know how much of a presentation you all want. I know many of you have seen the Grand several times. We've been working with the staff, and we've been really, they've been great, and so we're happy with most of the conditions. We have one, I think you know, on Karen's condition on the parking garage that I'm going to turn over to Mitch to talk a little bit more about the office building and the parking garage. I don't know if Chairman Lyon, if you want us to talk a little bit about the condition, or if you want to ask a question.
That was what my one question was. I wanted to hear what condition you wanted modified, or
We want to talk about the condition about the parking garage.
please.
Okay, so I'm actually going to turn it over to Mitch, who's going to talk a little bit about the height and the condition in the parking garage and kind of our comments, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Okay, so we're just going to try to keep the presentation fairly short. Okay, thank you. And we have a board. So we're going to set it up right. We have this board. Sorry, that might be easier. So we're going to set up this board right here.
Okay.
Yeah, for the audience, it's a site plan. I'm happy to turn it.
But you're going to have to talk from the. Okay.
I'm Mitch Rosen. I work for Salt River Project, Papago Park Center. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to address you. I've been doing this now, whether I want to admit it or not, for over 30 years, and this is the first time I've given up and chose to use glasses in front of you, so it's a humbling experience that I do that. And I'm going to see whether I need them or not, so we'll work through this together. With regard to the question about the multifamily and whether or not the multifamily users would find their way into an adjacent office building parking structure. The office building parking structures are gated and are managed by typically third-party management companies. And so in order for a car to get in there, they need to have a swipe card to be able to do it. So the likelihood of that becoming a problem is limited by that. And then in addition to that, we have both an association that runs Papago Park Center as well as the Grand, and then there are owners that would be working with each other to eliminate that. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. As Manjula said, we've worked very closely with staff and have enjoyed working with staff for years and years. I don't like coming up where I don't agree with one of staff's conditions, and I've shared that with staff, but sometimes you disagree, and so I'd ask you to consider our position. Again, I'm Mitch Rosen, and I'm the developer for SRP. SRP is the master developer for Papago Park Center. We are requesting that item number 3, the condition number 3, be removed as a condition. I will show you on a PowerPoint some of the building elevations as it relates to the restriction that staff would like to see, which is limiting the height of the parking structure. I believe staff is comfortable with allowing the height of the building to increase, but is not comfortable with allowing the height of the parking structure to increase above what they've recommended. And I'd like to talk to you about that relationship and why that doesn't work. One other note to make is that we are not asking for any increase in density on this project. The project was approved several years ago, and what's happened since that time is that we've eliminated one of the buildings south of the Grand Canal. And I'll stop here for just a moment. And we're very proud of what's happening there. You've probably seen the building on the freeway under construction now. Plus, we have our first office building built and fully leased to MUFG and to SAP, both fantastic corporate users. And so as it's developed, we're pleased to see how the systems that we've put in place are helping navigate quality construction. And our role at SRP and at Papago Park Center is to create a framework for the developers that will come in to develop in an environment that controls good development and encourages good development. And I think this condition number 3 undermines that, and we want to work to eliminate it so that our developers, as they react to market conditions, can do so. And I think you'll see that when I get to our PowerPoint presentation. Also, and please stop me anywhere during the presentation if you want. I've talked to you about the PAD being approved, and there are design guidelines in place assuring quality development. That was approved a couple of years ago. The context of our project is that it's in Papago Park Center. And Papago Park Center is essentially a fully built-out project with primarily office buildings around it. There is multifamily to the east of this building that's subject to this condition. The other thing to know is that when Washington and Priest were improved to accommodate the 202 many years ago, what happened is that they built up Washington and they built up Priest to ramp up to the 202. The result of that is that our project, Papago Park Center and the Grand, are 16 feet below Washington at this point. And I'm going to point out the point I'm referring to. So this is built up to get over, and as a result, this building is 20 feet below. This building here is about 60 feet below.
Mitch,
Yes, sir.
sorry to interrupt. Call me OCD. Would you be willing to flip the board 180 so north would be up?
Oh, absolutely. We can't read the words from here, so give me my glasses.
Super. Well, you did great anyway.
Yeah, well, okay. So we've talked about the fact that building at its grade is 16 feet below Washington. I also want to emphasize that while we have the ability to build up to an 8-story building at that site, the way that the stipulation is written, it stops us from being able to build more than, 4 stories from a parking structure. And without being able to build the parking structure necessary to accommodate the building, you're effectively not allowing the building to be built at that height because there's a direct relationship between the user inside of the building and the required parking. The other thing to point out is that this parking structure, which is having its height limited, is perpendicular to Washington. And it's, you can see here, is perpendicular. It's roughly 100 feet wide. It's a little wider than this building in here. And then it pulls in on both sides 18 feet. So between it being pulled in on the sides and the landscape in front of it, and the fact that it's perpendicular to Washington, has a limited impact on the edge along Washington. I will point out during my PowerPoint presentation that I also think that if we're so lucky as to be able to get a building of 8 stories in height, that by limiting that parking structure's height, it looks like it's missing a tooth along the edge on Washington. You'll see what I'm talking about in the PowerPoint presentation. We started this major PAD process a year ago, and we're $100,000 into that. It is what it is. I just want you to know that that's what it takes to get to here. And so if we aren't able to get this height in this PAD, I believe we're going to have to go back through a major PAD amendment, which may not take a year and it may not take $100,000, but it is a process. And when you're reacting to a competitive marketplace and competing with Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee, and Detroit, Michigan for a user, if you can't deliver what that user wants quickly, quote unquote, shovel ready, and instead we have to go through another major PAD process, I think you inhibit your ability to secure that user. The last thing I'll say is that if this PAD is approved without that condition, this board will still see through the design review process the building and the parking structure, and we'll have an opportunity to make comment on it. With that, I'd like to be able to go through the PowerPoint on the items that I think are relevant to this condition. If I push this one there, okay. I'm going to go through this to get to the one building. So the building that you see with the glass on it in the center is the office building under the assumption that it's 8 stories. And next to it, to the left or to the east, would be a parking structure that would accommodate the typical market parking that would be required for that. And then you'll notice immediately to the east or left of that, there's no design to it, but it's a module of what the apartment complex that has been approved and its height would be. Remember that, or I'll remind you that we're 16 feet below before we hit Washington. Now I'll show you what it looks like in the next slide with it gone. So if it's a 4-story building and associated parking structure, it peaks over Washington and that's it. So there's what it looks like at a full build out if we're so fortunate as to get an 8-story building there. And that's what it looks like with a 4-story building and the associated parking structure. Again, another shot of the same thing with an 8-story and a 4-story. And you'll see my contention is it looks, and if we're so fortunate as to get an 8-story building there, it looks like it's missing a tooth as you look at it along the edge of Washington. Here's a little farther away with an 8-story building and an associated parking structure, and a 4-story building and associated parking structure. Again, 8-story and 4-story. Thank you for letting me go through that in such detail. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and respond.
Okay, questions for our applicant? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
What's an acceptable height limit? What works given your expectations of what the market's going to bring to that site?
Yes, thank you for asking. That which was proposed, which is, and I have our architect here, Jeff, that is, where's Jeff? Jeff,
That would be,
Hi, my name is Jeff Martin with Kendall Design Collaborative. That height at full build-out would be 7 levels and 57 feet. 57, yes.
Another 30 feet then.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Well, then we'll thank you for your presentation.
thank you.
We'll have you back up in a few minutes, maybe. All right. Does Ms. Stovall, do you wish to respond to that?
No, we have nothing further to add at this time.
Well, okay, so here's my question. I would like to know a little more, if you'd grace us with the answer, what the reasoning was for the 27-foot limit.
So the 27 feet is taking into consideration if the site were still zoned GID, which was the previous zoning district on the property and what the applicant was previously entitled to before the PAD and rezoning took place in 2013. At Washington, if a 35-foot high building were constructed, and that's what GID would allow, that 27-foot height from grade, and that grade for the entire PAD is measured from the midpoint of the property line off of Priest Drive. A 27-foot height would allow a visible 35-foot height from Washington. So it was to not take something away that would have been previously allowed from the development. Again, you know, we are not necessarily opposed to a garage going in. We would like to consider an increased height of that garage along with the design, which is the intent of the PAD reform that occurred in 2015. It's to allow us to look at the design of a structure along with the height of the structure, along with the context before approving a building height.
So that sounds to me like you're content that we'll see this again and we can make judgments on it then?
If the 7-story height that the applicant is requesting is approved, you will look at the design, but the height will not be limited. So you would see a development plan review come before you, just like you did for the P1 garage on the further west on Washington. You would see a DPR for that come through. But the height would be permitted if this PAD amendment were approved.
Okay, I understand that. I thought I heard you say that that staff was interested in allowing a height greater than 27 feet. Is that correct?
As long as we can look at the design concurrent with the building height.
Okay. Okay, I've got you. All right.
Is that clear? Because the applicant's concern is that that triggers another PAD amendment, basically, if you were to stay with staff recommendations. So I think that's where the disagreement is.
I see. All right, so, yes, Commissioner Saunders.
So just a follow-up clarification. We will see the design of these buildings regardless, correct?
Correct. Development plan reviews for any new construction would come before, at a minimum, the DRC. When this comes in, and as explained in the staff report, we would like all of the developers in this PAD to consider, again, the location adjacent to the light rail line, the possibility of putting parking spaces underground instead of large garages at the street front, and possibly locating parking more interior to the site, again, instead of adjacent to the street front. So, yes.
Thanks.
Yes, I understand it. Although we see this again for DPR, the nature of the issue of height will be affected by what we do here today, whether we really have something to say about the height or not. Commissioner Brown.
The applicant mentioned the process. There will be, if he goes through a PAD, there will be a process. If everything goes smoothly, and they certainly have a lot of practice with producing these documents, is that a 1-month turnaround? Can you eyeball what a really well-done, smooth?
You mean for a major PAD amendment?
Yes.
That would require a neighborhood meeting, a development. It's basically the process that they're going through now, very
Yes.
smoothly, 4 to 6 months.
More questions for staff?
Yes. And I think that's primarily because of this. You've got to go through the neighborhood meetings. There's advertising time and long lead times to get to each step. And then you've got to go through our process and then through a couple of city council meetings beyond that. And that's if there's no dissension or continuances. So a smooth one is at least 4 to 6 months. That's
Mr.
generous.
Casano.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Question for the staff. Is there a way to put into the condition that you would allow up to, as we're talking 8 stories, is that, I think that was the number used, what the maximum parking height would be at the time? In other words,
7 levels
7.
total is what the applicant's requesting.
Okay. Is there a way to tie the two together? In other words, when the building height goes up, the parking goes up to a maximum amount? That would be, because if the building went even higher for whatever reason. What I'm trying to get to is, right now, we're saying we only want you to have 27 feet, period. But knowing that that would only allow parking for a 4-story building, but they come in with an 8-story, we would condition that they could go up to X height, 57 feet for that 8-story building. But
All right, so if I may, I'm going to jump in here. So I think what would happen here is, please, let me defer to Mr. Levick.
Chairman, Commissioner members, if it's at the discretion of the commission to build in a stipulation regarding the height in relationship to the garage, that you guys can certainly do that as an added condition to this request.
Thank you. So I will say that I think that may be unnecessary because let's say they can get a tenant that will do a 6-story office building. It sounds to me like the concern is they might build the 60-foot tall parking garage anyway, but I don't believe they would do so because they don't have the financial incentive to provide that much parking. So the height of the office is going to dictate how tall that parking garage becomes. And if we set whatever limit we are comfortable with on the height of the parking garage, as Commissioner Brown just indicated with his hands, they will follow each other.
well, that's what Mr. Chairman, that's what I want to do. I want them to follow. The building height follows the parking height, or the parking height follows the building height. This idea of setting it at maximum of 27 feet right now doesn't make any sense to me because that building hasn't been built, nor has it been signed. So I would like to give the flexibility, but tie it to the height or the needs of the building to a maximum amount we can set here.
Okay. Well, let's come back to our discussion in a moment here. I don't want to neglect to have our public comment section. Is there anyone with us in our audience behind that board or otherwise who wishes to comment on this case? If so, we can provide you 3 minutes to speak your mind. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Levick. I do not see any, so we will close our public comment section. We'll move to our commissioner discussion. So, commissioners, what do we think?
Mr. Chairman, I will.
Commissioner Amorosi first, please.
Thank you, Chairman Lyon. I worry about if everyone's in agreement that the office building is going to be higher, the residential building is going to be higher, and that's going to make the parking structure go higher, then why are we going to extend the process by 6 months with a major PAD when we're essentially in agreement that it's going to get denser and larger?
Okay. Understood. Other comments? Commissioner Casano?
Well, I just go back to what I was saying earlier. I just want to make that part of our discussion again. Tie the building, the parking height, maximum height to the maximum height of the building that we think will be there. In other words, if we approve 57 feet and they come up with a 12-story building, that probably wouldn't park that building. But by us allowing the maximum that they're asking for of 57 feet, only if that building goes up proportionally that would require that parking to be available.
Okay. I can understand the motives behind that. I don't know if it's a condition that I need. And I guess I'd like to respond to your remark, Commissioner Amorosi. I think the reason we potentially might say limit it to 27 feet, knowing that they would potentially come back for another PAD, is if we were not inclined to grant that additional height on the second go-around when they come for that PAD. I'm not saying that's my position, but just the thought. Anyone else wish to make Commissioner Amorosi?
One thing I noticed when I read through this was they already had a neighborhood meeting on this, and nobody from the public showed up. And then if we do this again, they're going to be forced to have another public meeting where nobody's going to show up.
Commissioner Summers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm confident that market forces will prevail here, and it doesn't make sense financially for anyone to build parking. It makes much more sense for them to build office. There's already 10,000 parking spaces allowed within the PAD, and we are immediately adjacent to light rail. And I'm confident that market forces will handle this issue. If we're going to add a stipulation about tying the two heights together, I just want to make sure and hear from our applicant that that's not going to inhibit their process, that we would still be very competitive going forward.
All right, and Vice Chair DiDomenico.
Commissioner Summers said that very well. I think that I'm not hearing from any of the comments made by the commission that we would likely in a PAD process down the road look to restrict the height. So why place the restriction now? I'm comfortable letting market dictate it and taking a look at the eventual height proposed along with the design when it comes back to us through the DPR. So I'm in support of removing that stipulation.
Agreed. At close to $20,000 a parking space, I don't think anyone's going to build any more than they need to. Commissioner Brown.
I agree with what Commissioner DiDomenico just stated. I just want to recognize that this is sort of on the edge of town, closely associated with a lot of high transportation, high capacity transportation. I wouldn't want the same loose attitude to occur of a project of a similar question in the downtown area or along Apache Boulevard. This is, I think it's a self-contained and almost a city within itself. And so for that matter, along those lines, I have no problems supporting this accommodation.
All right.
Good. Oh, fine.
Yeah? Okay. Suparna?
Just to clarify that staff's concern is not about the range or any of that. It is the consistent concern we have had that you've seen in the previous DPR that came in. Just to clarify staff's position is our Washington Street and our gateway into our city fronts majority of their garage parking space parking, and that's where our concern is to mitigate some of those visual effects. So just to clarify, that was the biggest reason, but if you were to, like Ryan said, if you were to limit or put that range in, there is a clarifying note that we just noticed in our PAD that's different from what the applicant just said in terms of the request that we would ask the applicant to revise the report before it goes to City Council in that range. Karen can clarify it. Right now is.
And I'd actually like the applicant to come up and confirm that I think there's an error in here. On sheet A5, the height for P2, the range is 16 feet to 67 feet on here, and I want to make sure 57 feet is
57.
the correct. Is it 57 or 67?
I don't know, and so what I will do is rely on Jeff, and he'll need to process it here. Jeff is a guru with this, and he spends all of his time on it. So if you will allow us to look at it, and Jeff, do you understand the question? Or
Yeah.
Okay,
I
do you
think
see-
the discrepancy between
Yeah.
this and sort of the
Yeah.
letter of explanation and the
Yeah.
PUD itself?
Yeah.
I
I understand it's a maximum of 7 levels. I just don't know what the height's going to be at 7
I
levels.
believe it is 57.
57, I think
Yeah.
so too.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
that address the question?
Yes, and then Commissioner Summers, did you wish to ask a question as well regarding, I thought you said you wanted to hear from the applicant that this would be financially feasible, something to that effect?
If the commission would like to entertain that idea of tying the two together, yeah, it'd be important to hear from our applicant.
Maybe they do. If we were to tie the height of the parking structure to the height of the office building in a direct fashion, would that be something you could support, assuming that an 8-story office would allow for the parking that you've shown with it?
I've heard the commission wrestle with the concept, and what I'm not going to answer it directly yet. I'm going to develop a thought here for just a second and then answer it. And that is, what I see our role is to create a quality project that has what is necessary to remove so that the developers can find success. I heard several commissioners wrestle with the idea of why any developer would build unnecessary parking. They won't. The market forces will push down and limit that parking. The idea, first of all, it is limited to 8 stories. And the only issue then is that parking structure immediately adjacent to it. Parking dynamics change, and it appears that they perhaps are over time going to go down as we go to autonomous cars and the like. But what we're seeing in the marketplace continues to be that the users at this time want higher parking ratios. And so the point is this: if it's an 8-story building and you're using standard demand parking, you're going to see, for an 8-story building, if we're so fortunate to get that sort of 7-story parking structure and no more. You're limiting it so you can't. If, in a worst case scenario, something else happened, your staff has protected you so that you could, if somebody came in and said, I want to build a much higher parking structure, you could squash that because it's inconsistent with sort of the development guidelines and all that. So to your point, I don't know what words would look like to try and manage something like that. And so I would not be supportive of it, but would accept it if it was imposed upon us.
That's fair. How are you with that, Commissioner Casano?
I'm fine with that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think that we're probably ready for a motion. Am I right? So I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Summers.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve PL 180199, removing staff stipulation number 3, which restricts the height of the parking garage to 27 feet.
I would ask, would you be okay with, instead of removing condition 3, amending it to, say, 57 feet instead of 27 feet, which is what the applicant asked?
That's fine.
All right. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Motion to approve with stated revision from Commissioner Sumners and second from Commissioner Casano. All those in favor by show of hands, please. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. All right. So now we move on to the 13th Street residents. Uh-oh. What's going on here? I broke my iPad. And I'm back.
I think it's open for.
Mr. Shimke.
Thank you and good evening, Commission and Chair Lyon. Blake Shimke, Planning Technician for the City of Tempe Planning Department. All right. Once we get going, I can start going. All right, so the applicant is requesting a use permit to allow us for a second-story addition to a single-family residence rebuild. The project is located on lots 4 and 5 of the nationally registered and listed University Park subdivision. The existing home is historically significant as it was designed by Kemper Goodwin and is a contributing property within the University Park Historic District. The new home that's being proposed will be 9,826 square feet spread over 2 floors. The first floor will have 5,210 square feet of livable space. Aerial vicinity. So here's the kind of the site plan, the first floor and garage. Just the floor plan. The first floor will include a master bedroom with an adjacent ensuite and walk-in closet, a formal dining room, an office, study, kitchen, storage areas, and a powder room, as well as a central living space. The second floor will have 2,287 square feet of livable space and include a guest bedroom with ensuite baths and an attached guest quarter. Based on the information provided by the applicant and the analysis provided in the staff report, staff supports the request subject to conditions of approval provided in the staff report. And I'll be available should you have any questions.
All right, questions for Mr. Shimke? All right, we will thank you. All right, so we'll invite our applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. For your record, my name is Manjula Bobs, law firm Gamage and Burnham. I am here tonight on behalf of the Annette Buse Trust. Have a little PowerPoint. There goes. So I just want to talk a little bit about what Blake said in terms of we are requesting a use permit to build a second story on a single family residence. So it is currently a single family residence. We want to remain a single family residence. We're just asking to build a second story. The house itself does not have a historic designation. It is in a historic neighborhood, but it currently, could be just a one-story residence, larger one, which we'll talk more about. But I want to be very specific about what our request is here, which is only to build a second story. The house itself, as you know, is on 13th Street. There's a couple of interesting things about 13th Street. The 13th Street, well, it's part of University Park, is actually a pretty diverse, architecturally diverse street. You have several houses that are both contemporary. You have the house to the west. The house to the west of that is kind of what I call the ski chalet. I don't know what kind of architectural diagram is it, but those are both two-story houses. This house faces out onto 13th Street. Then, of course, the Apache curve. Then we'll soon have the streetcar running in front of it, and then Gamage. So there's a lot of height and a lot of height adjacent to it. There's also a two-story building that's immediately south of it, which we'll talk about, kind of south of the alley. Right now, and just to kind of go through it, the house has not been well maintained, unfortunately, for 50 years. There's a lot of property deficiencies currently on it, and I'll kind of go through very briefly. This is not about the house itself, but I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what we've discovered as we've gone through it. You have kind of, the house was on the market for about a year. There's some issues, there's other people who had looked at the house. It's a double lot, so it certainly can be a lot of things. There are people who have talked about whether they could subdivide it. You can certainly subdivide it, put a couple of houses there. And one thing this project does, it keeps it owner-occupied, single-family house. But anyway, in terms of just the property deficiencies, you have water damage, dry rot, structural cracks at the roof. The biggest issue, a lot of it is that you have negative drainage. So basically the soil is buckling on itself, and the house will then have kind of the slab of the existing home will continue to crack. Just to give you a sense kind of the house and what's been going on there. In terms of the house and kind of what Blake said, the house is currently R16. What we have done is we do not max out the R16 setbacks. And so we have very purposely, this is facing north, the chair, we have larger setbacks along 13th Street. This is about 33 feet. And the garage that starts right here is about 40 feet from, I think approximately from the 13th Street, from the property line, which is double the setback required in R16. If the single story was not allowed, then what we would do is just take the house and spread it out and then kind of up to the R16 setbacks. And so what we think what you're doing with the single story, similar to the single story that are two adjacent to the houses and the other height on the block, is try to do something that is consistent with the rest of the buildings and the houses in the area. Just give you a very brief kind of look at the two-story houses that are in the neighborhood. These are mainly on west of College. If you go east on College, there are a bunch of other two-story houses. There's approximately 16 two-story houses in the University Park neighborhood. Many of them, as you see here, there's these two that I've talked about on 13th Street. Both have been rebuilt, small bungalows, been rebuilt as 2 stories. There's a 2-story building right here on 15th Street. There's several houses here that have been rebuilt. They were originally 1-story houses and then have been rebuilt as 2-story houses. So this is a very consistent request that has happened throughout this neighborhood. Let me see if I can, just to give you a sense of some of the houses, again, the 2-story elements that are throughout the neighborhood. I think most of you have seen some of them, but just to show you kind of the 2-story elements that are occurring throughout the neighborhood. This is the house immediately south. This is the 2-story elements, the backyard of the 13th Street house. This is the alley, and this is the 2-story house immediately to the south, in the rear, as it says there. Just briefly, I wanted to talk through, we have a support letter from Neil Giuliano, who I know would like to speak tonight. He is the neighbor immediately to the west, and he can talk about the 2-story house next to his 2-story house. Then, of course, we have a letter from Dr. Crow, who is our neighbor to the north. One thing, actually, before I get there, I want to talk about one thing really quickly I forgot to mention. The way the house is set up, and I don't know if Blake talked about this, the 2-story element is actually over the garage. So what we have done is, on the east side, this is the house to the east is a 1-story, and this will still be a 1-story on the east portion of the house. The west portion of the house will have the 2-story over the garage, so the 2-story element will be adjacent to its 2-story element on its west. So in terms of the test, just to go through it, let's go through the use permit approval criteria. And again, the first criteria, as you all know, is that we will not create significant vehicular or pedestrian traffic. The 2nd story will not have an impact on pedestrian traffic. It is a single-family home, the owner occupied by 2 people. Whether it's a 1-story or 2-story, will have the same amount of traffic. The new house will not cause any nuisance arising from the emissions of odor, dust, gas, noise, or vibration. We believe the new house will be an enhancement from the existing structure, which is falling apart and in somewhat deterioration. The existing property defects pose safety hazards to the residents living inside the house and can certainly cause spillover nuisances to the adjacent property. Over the years, certainly it's also in terms of it's been sitting there vacant, it's adjacent to an alley, so you've also had some transient nature running through the house, which is why we cut down some of the landscaping, just as we talk through that. They will not contribute to the deterioration of the neighborhood or downgrade the property values. The applicant is making a significant investment to create a new and livable residence. The current existing home and property in a state of disrepair. We believe this will certainly contribute to the property values of the neighborhood. And also, as I've said, there are many other 2-story houses in the surrounding neighborhood, including the 2 adjacent houses to the west and the adjacent home to the south. This house will face 13th Street. This house does not face another single-family house, so the 2-story element will not impose anything to the north. It faces Apache and Gamage rather than a single-family house. 20-foot wide alley immediately behind the property adds separation to the properties to the south. And there is a 2-story building located on the property to the south. And then the Graduate Hotel, which many of you know, immediately to the east, is a 6-story hotel, so currently adding to the height along that area. So this house is going to be built in conformance with the R16 standards, which is underlying zoning district. We are not asking for any type of variance to the district. All we're asking for is a use permit to build a 2nd story that's compatible with the rest of the neighborhood. And just to end this, this will not result in any disruptive behavior, both inside or outside the premises. This will be the applicant's primary residence. As you may know, the applicant's son and grandchildren live in the neighborhood. The applicant is very involved with their church at college in Alameda, and so they have making investment to come to Tempe. They're very excited about coming to Tempe. The applicant or husband will be the primary residence there. The guest quarters are for their grandchildren. And then there's room for, if they need it, for future home health care workers in the future. The property will be privately owned by the applicant. And then finally, we are signing a covenant stating the house will not be rented, and the restriction will be binding on all the successors. So, in summary, the proposed new home satisfies the use approval criteria. The proposed home will allow for a beautiful, new, livable residence and it's compatible with the height of the surrounding property. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Summers.
Thank you, Ms. Voss. Just a question. I'm looking at a sheet that's in our packet a little further in, and I think I'm seeing that the one story is almost the exact same height as the two story on either side.
The one-story elevation, like right here? That one? The two-story pit, does this work, Scott, or, oh, sorry. This elevation, I think at the height is like 30 feet, which is the height of the R16, and I believe these are, I mean, a little lower, maybe 26-ish in elevation, approximately. But approximately. So the it's still, they're high, so we didn't ask for, our use permit is to build a two-story house. It is not to build just a two-story over the garage. So they are high ceilings, but there is not a second story over that one story.
Sorry, typically from our standpoint, we are concerned about, for purposes of a use permit, what it looks like from the neighbors as you walk down the street. And the difference here between the portion of the house that's one story and the portion of the house that's two story, if this were to be built today, I'm not sure you'd be able to see the difference. That's the only point I was trying to make, that
Oh.
wasn't really clear in the one story, two story discussion that we had.
I'm sorry, if there would be the difference between a one-story or a two-story, or if it was. Or
The building height from the outside is very similar.
Yeah, so we're asking for a use permit for a two-story house.
Right. Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Sure.
All right, other questions for our applicant? Thank you. All right. We have a number of people who have filled out white cards. Again, if you wish to be added to the list, you can find one of those cards at the back. Let me start with Jason Kimball. I see here a request to watch a video on YouTube. I'm not sure that we can do that. Jason, would you like to speak for a few minutes? You can tell us what is important about this video.
I submitted that.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe it doesn't say Jason.
I submitted that on behalf of my husband. We were hoping there is just a really beautiful YouTube video on this house. It's 2 minutes and 38 seconds. I didn't think ahead of time to figure out a way to hook it up, and so I don't know, could I mirror it from my phone? Could I open it up? Is that not something we can do?
Well, it's not a matter of technology as much as it's not something we customarily allow
Okay.
to bring somebody else's video presentation. But if you'd like to share your thoughts with us, we can certainly give you 3 minutes and you can tell us.
I have my own card in there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we'll call you when we get to your name. All right. So moving right along, we have Mr. Philip Yates.
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Philip Yates, and I'm the president for the Riverside Neighborhood Association. My family has been in this city for 5 generations, and we've only seen a handful of really, really beautiful houses that are really under demise of having been demolished in the future. This is one. This was built in 1957 by Kemper Goodwin, was the designer for it. I'm really sorry you couldn't see the video that I was discussing, because it really was an awesome video to see. But Barbara McMillan Davis lived in it last, and did just a beautiful presentation of what the house was like when it was first built, and that she went through it, and it had a beautiful playroom, bar. It was awesome, gorgeous house. The fact that this could actually just be changed is really wouldn't be a good thing for the area. This is a very, very historic area. And these houses are very historic. One of very few that have actually seen I can look outside and see the Gamage Auditorium. Frank Lloyd Wright built, and it's just an incredible way to see the downtown area. Very few people have actually had that kind of a experience to just look out across the street and see something like Gamage Auditorium. And it's just an awesome area to live in. I wish I could live in that area. It's awesome. But yeah, I would really be ashamed to see this changed in any way at all. And that is why Riverside is definitely going to oppose anything be changed with regard to this house. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. Yates?
I'm going to ask this question because it's kind of the crux of the matter before us, and so this question, anyone who comes up, if you want to address this question before I ask you. The request is for a second story in a single-family residence. So specifically in this neighborhood or in the context of the surrounding properties, tell me how you react to a second story on a single family property.
Second stories, typically, at least in the Riverside neighborhood area, has had a bad effect on the neighborhood because a lot of students will move in and just rent it by the room, and it winds up being like a fraternity house kind of a thing where the police department has to get involved with it, the fire department has to get involved with it. I've seen it happen across my street from my own home, and it is really, really detrimental to the area that this does not be expanded, because this is just one of the very few places that actually has this kind of a history to it, and to impose that kind of a threat to the area would really, really be not a very good thing for the area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I have some comments to read into the record here. Stanley and Linda Williams, I believe this says. I apologize, there's a couple parts that are hard to read, but are the utilities behind the house to be buried, and if so, will it affect the historical designation of neighbor houses or historic districts? So that's a question. We can come back to that one, I suppose. Christine Kimball. Your remarks on the back I will read. I am a homeowner and reside in University Park. This property is iconic and historically significant to our neighborhood and community. This proposed new build is not a complement nor compatible with any of the existing homes. Please deny this use permit on this beautiful property. I support, along with my husband, the comments shared by Ms. Karen Gitless. Okay. I have a comment from Joan. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her last name. We'll get to you in a moment. Thank you. So let me read Joan's comments here. It's Bahamond. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that last name. I ask that this commission deny this use permit. This house, in quotes, will already fill the once lovely lot, now devoid of trees and vegetation, and is too large and does not match the character of this historic neighborhood. I also find the support from representatives of Arizona State to be disingenuous, considering the applicant's recent donation to ASU. In addition, I fully support the comments of Ms. Karen Gitless presenting here tonight. And then there's an asterisk here that says the donation was $10 million. Paul Gilbert, do you wish to speak? Are you still here?
I'm Mongela's assistant, and I only put on there only speak if necessary.
I see, I see. All right, well, I think we consider you part of the application team then. Thank you. And now we arrive, Ms. Karen Gitless.
Good evening, Karen Gitless. I live in Maple Ash, 1206 Maple Ash. Commissioners, there are no words I can say to you, no logic or rationale or point of view that will sway the majority of you to deliberate or vote differently on this case than you are about to do. But I do appreciate this opportunity to speak to you nonetheless. I will use my 3 minutes to elegize the remarkable piece of the historic built environment that we are about to lose, and I have a little addendum to this also. First, I would like to thank the minority of people on this board who are open to listening carefully to other points of view, who appreciate that appreciate where we are coming from, that where we are coming from is as important a place as where we are headed to, reference to historic preservation, and who don't believe that the value of a piece of land resides only in the dollar amount it can fetch. Mr. Casano, that's directed at you. So thank you, David Lyon, Thomas Brown, and Andrew Johnson. You have respected a part of Tempe's active and passionate community that loses case after case to random and frequently outside development interests. You appreciate different perspectives and respect those who come to supplicate before you. You believe that there are multiple elements to quality of life that don't necessarily include high rises. Thank you for serving our community in this difficult and sometimes trying fashion as you sit here. I believe there is something very broken in the city of Tempe when people like me come before our appointed officials only to have certain very specific arguments rejected time and again. I also believe this is a systemic issue which ultimately is fostered by lack of council leadership and should be laid to rest at the feet of the city council. Now comes the dirge part. The McMillan home is historically significant as it was designed by architect Kemper Goodwin and retains a high level of integrity. It is a contributing property within the National Register listed University Park Historic District. The property is likely individually eligible for listing in the National Register and the Tempe Historic Register. At this time, however, the McMillan House is not classified historic eligible or listed in the Tempe Historic Property Register and therefore not subject to the Historic Preservation Review. And my random thoughts. This McMillan House is absolutely salvageable, not presented in any of the pictures you saw of it, and too bad you couldn't see that YouTube tape, should remain part of this historic district. In fact, that's critical. If it is not part of this historic district, we are, according to the city, rapidly losing historic resources within University Park, and it could easily be delisted. This house will no longer be a contributing element. The nearly 10,000 square feet of house that is proposed on this site for this site is totally incompatible with anything in this area. How can the city of Tempe approve this ghastly mansion while it can't provide affordable housing and doesn't have a plan to do that as of yet for the many people who live in the same area who are getting priced out of it?
Ms. Gitless, could you give us your final thoughts, please?
Yes, my final thought is you can put a price on a piece of land, but a community such as exists in University Park is priceless. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Ms. Gitless? Okay, thank you. All right, so I have one more here. Neil Giuliano.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. I'm here tonight. I reside at 21 East 13th Street. I'm in the property just to the west of the subject property this evening. If I had had the time, I would have gone back and asked the great staff to research the house that I live in. My house replaced a little 980 square foot bungalow at 21 East 13th Street in 1990. And I am sure, convinced, that at that time, people said, what are they doing? That's a 1/4 acre lot. You're replacing this tiny little bungalow with a 4,600 square foot home that is 2 stories, both in the front of the house and 2 stories in the back of the house. And this city is going to poop, and this is going to be the end of the world, and it's just going to be terrible across the street from Gamage and in this neighborhood. Well, I would contend with you that 2 things. There's 2 ways to kind of look at this. Number one, I don't think my house is terrible because it's 2 stories in both the front and the back. I think it actually fits in. There's only 7 lots along there. 6 of them are 1/4 acre, and the one that's in before you tonight is a 1/2 acre. I'm kind of grateful. That lot, and I talked to Barbara before she sold it, that lot could have been sold and subdivided into 2 1/4 acre lots, and 2 houses of 4,600 square feet like mine could have been built on each one. I'm grateful that the property is going to remain a single-family home. Yeah, it's a large single-family home, but they have a large family with kids and grandkids and pets and a whole lot of things. I'm grateful that it's going to be a single-family home on this quintessential little piece of Tempe where there's only 8 homes along there, you know, on those lots, 7, 8 homes along there. So I'm grateful about that. You know, it's not going to be a fraternity house. You've already seen there's not going to be anyone even going to even be able to rent the house. I quite honestly, I would never agree to that with my house. I may get old someday and go live in a smaller house and rent the big house that I own. So I'm a little surprised, you know, that it didn't get purchased and subdivided. It actually could have very easily been before you for a zoning change to create a little 4-plex condo complex like our over in Maple Ash, because it's a big lot. You could have put a little parking, you could have a little driveway right in the middle of that, 4 units in there, 2 stories, about 1,800 each, and we had a totally different conversation. I'm grateful that we have a single-family home going in next to the investment that I made in my home. I think it does fit. It faces north to Gamage. Nothing's going to be as big as Gamage, but I think the scale is fine. I'm happy to have single-family occupancy forever next to the home that I invested in.
Mr.
And
Giuliano, would you
I
give
think
us
it
your
fits.
final
So,
thoughts, please?
my final thought is usually I would say you have a tough decision in front of you, but having been familiar with these kinds of decisions, I don't think this is a tough one. The single-story use is compatible, it makes sense, and I would urge you to support it.
All right,
Thanks.
questions for Mr. Giuliano? I don't think we have any, thank you. All right. So, would you care to respond to those comments?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I just have 2 comments to make. One, in terms of the, I think it was Mr. Williams, I'm not sure, I think, in terms of the utility conversation, my clients are having a conversation with APS in terms of just burying the pole behind their house. But I think that was a question, so I wanted to answer it in terms of that. Secondly, and as the vice chair stated, we are, only requesting a 2nd story, a use permit for a 2nd story for a 2-story house next to 2 adjacent 2-story houses. We believe that the height is compatible with the neighborhood. It faces Gamage, there's height around it, and it will be an owner-occupied single-family house. So with that, I believe we met the test of a use permit, and with that, I'd ask for your support. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Voss?
One question. Ms. Voss, to your knowledge, and I think the owners are here, maybe they'll answer this question. Was any thought given to ever looking at rehabilitating this home?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Casano, I can actually answer that, whether they gave thought to it. Let me give you what I've known. This house has been on the market for over a year. I have had several, both Neil and I have had several friends and clients look at that house. As the price came down, Neil talked to Barbara in terms of what the house could be done. Several people looked at it, have priced out how to fix that house, and honestly, it is more money to fix that house than that house really could be worth. And actually, I was in it today, and I can tell you, I live in a historic neighborhood. I mean, I can tell you all about, I'm the chair of my historic neighborhood. I can tell you all about it. That house has not been maintained, so both the structural cracks, foundation cracks, the soil make it virtually impossible to really kind of keep that house together. But I don't know that that's Mr. I think from my client's perspective, as Neil said, they would like to live in a house. They are going to live in a house, that they would design. It's a single-family house. I don't think that they, necessarily they came in knowing, they talked to Barbara about what it is. But that owner, they explained to her exactly, they were so I can tell you, they were competing offers on the house. One of the things that she wanted to do was make it owner-occupied and single-family. Because living in these neighborhoods, as Phil said, what you get are, you can make 2 or 3-story houses, 2 different houses, and then you can rent them out, and you have a bigger problem with children. So what she's trying to do is protect the neighborhood, have a single-family owner-occupied house. That's the answer to that question. On a longer story, this is only about, should this house be 1-story or 2-story? I mean, that's the question we're here to ask. And, we'd like it to be 2 stories so it's compatible with, around surrounding houses.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Voss? Thank you. Commissioner Johnson?
So I see in the staff report, the lot coverage proposes 44%, and with an allowable of 45%.
I believe that's correct.
I think there was some dialogue in your portion of the report that said that if this use permit was not approved, the build-out could go to the lot, or not the lot lines, but the setbacks.
Yeah.
What would change the footprint if this use permit were not approved?
So what we would do is, I believe, and, we need to talk more to Blake, but what the plan is we would take this portion of the house will get spread out more, so that instead of having a 2nd story here, you can go to 20 feet. It would be closer along 13th Street. You can certainly use more of the backyard and spread out a little bit more on the overall lot.
You only have 1% lot coverage left to expand into.
I think that didn't the R16 at 45% on the 2 lots? I think we can still spread it out, because we have a 1-story plan. Blake, can we do that?
Say that again. R16, the maximum lot coverage is 45%.
45% on, when you have the 2 lots, and as we kind of move out this way. So Commissioner Johnson, I obviously I'm not the architect, we had looked at trying to redo the house, spread it out more, so to move some of this area this way, and it did work out in terms of the percentage. And it may be making the garage smaller and making the house larger. I mean, you'd have to shift the lot, you should probably spread more into the 13th Street portion of this site. That's
The minimum lot size is only 6,000 square foot.
So once you would spread that out, right? So I don't think it's 50% on half an acre. It's 50% on 6,000 square feet. Right, is that the way you would do the math?
I'm not sure I caught that.
What?
Yeah, it's the lot. The minimum lot size, 6,000.
So is the consensus that lot coverage would not change if this use permit were not approved? It could go out another 1%?
That's
lot
correct.
coverage. Okay, thank you.
Yes, but the answer to that question is we'd prefer to make a 2-story house.
All right. Other questions? Did you have a question, Commissioner Sumner? All right, then we will thank you again. All right. So let me ask staff quickly, is there anything that you wish to clarify for us before we begin our deliberations here? No? All right. Anything? All right. So, Commission, what do we think? Commissioner Casano.
I have a question of the staff. If the applicant had come forth with a 1-story design, would we be here tonight?
No.
No. So we as staff don't have design purview over single-family residential zoned properties. The only reason it's here in front of the Development Review Commission is because they are seeking the use permit for the second-story addition.
So based on that, if the applicant had chosen to go to a single story, they could still take down the existing home and change the whole thing and would never have been in front of this commission. Thank you.
Thoughts? Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Chairman Lyon. I look at this and they are respecting the front yard setback in relation to the other houses. I see 3 other houses that are 2 stories on the same side of the street. And even though this Tuscany style isn't what I would like, that's not my purview. I see a ultra-modern house. I see a rustic lodge house. I see all kinds of styles on this street, so I don't think it would be out of place because there isn't a constant look to the homes that are over there. I have to say that all they're doing is adding the second story. I saw one of the letters that said maybe they could move the house, but if from what the looks of it is, it doesn't seem like structurally it could be moved. And if there's a YouTube video, it seems like it's been documented on the historic nature of the home, who designed it. And so I have to say I would support this new house.
All right. Other thoughts? I'll jump in if no one else will. I don't know how to say what I need to say. I cannot support this, though. So the way the question has been put to us is, this is just about a second story. And here are your 5 criteria, and other people have second stories, so that's fine. I've looked at these other examples of 2-story homes, and overwhelmingly, these second-story pieces are very small. The second story of this home is larger than 2 of my home. And as Commissioner Sumner's pointed out, the entire house is very close to that height. So for criteria 4, compatibility with existing surrounding structures and uses, on the virtue of scale of height, for me, this does not fit. It does not fit on virtue of the total square footage. This is a massive home. This is what you call a mansion. There are less kind terms than that, but I'll leave it at mansion. It does not, to my mind, respect either the historic character of the neighborhood or the architectural and technologically advancing ASU, which is directly next by. And this is, to me, a tremendous missed opportunity. This is a beautiful lot, and sure, I'd love to see that home preserved, but that is not my purview to dictate that that's what should happen. Well, what should happen here? Well, I would hope that given that this is a lot that is going to be seen by many people in connection with ASU and in connection with our historic district, I would love to see an architect engaged who could say, listen, we're going to do something interesting and special here. And what I see is a design for a home that is 20 years old already and it hasn't been built. And it is lavish in its height and its scale and its decoration, but is not architecturally inspired. I would love to see you end up in a wonderful home, and I think you can do much, much, much better than this. There are many talented, brilliant architects that could design something absolutely fabulous that people would drive by and say, well, look at that, isn't that interesting? Isn't that just gorgeous? And this house is just not it. And I'm sorry, to me, it is absolutely not a fit for this neighborhood, this community. We have been told that this is only about the second story, and it is only about the permit, but the permit requires that the entire structure is well suited to its environment. And for me, this just does not make it. I beg of you, please do something more sensitive and special than this. Those are my thoughts. Does anyone else have any comments they wish to make? Commissioner Johnson.
I appreciate that, and I think I'm on the same lines with you. The only thing that I'll add is that before I even knew the Development Review Commission existed, a situation like this is something that would have motivated me to get involved and to become part of something like this, this body. Seeing something like that building be demolished and something like this replacing it would have probably enraged me as a citizen. But since we're talking about a use case and the criteria surrounding a use permit, I don't believe that the use permit to replace a historically significant single-family home with a rebuild and second-story, nearly 10,000 square foot building would be compatible with existing surrounding structures and uses. And I don't believe that my vote will save this property. I don't have any illusions about that, but I cannot support this tonight.
Anyone else make a comment, or shall we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make one more comment. This goes along with what I said about if we had been looking, we would not be looking at a single-story home built on this property. And that's what I think really it boils down to in my mind. Let's go to a single-story home. I can't support the massive two-story home, the two-story addition. It just looks, it looks like it belongs in the Biltmore from a design standpoint. I don't have any problem building a nice single-story house, filling up that whole lot, but this does not in any way, shape, or form excite me to be seen on the street. Thank you.
Shall we have a motion? All right, Commissioner Summers.
Surprising comments tonight. I appreciate hearing from everyone, and I also want to just raise the situation of the property owners, the folks who buy this property, and think they understand the rules about what they have to do to build. And I think we've just got to acknowledge that as well. We have, from what I understand, this house has been on the market for a year. Someone came in and bought it. They want to improve it. They want to build something bigger, better. We can debate about. And I believe they went through and understood the city's codes and ordinances and tried to bring forward a plan that works. And here they are, and I'm just having a hard time understanding how this fits in the context of the city's code and having an issue with it. If it was aesthetics, if we were talking about having design review for residential property, that's different. That's not the charge of this body. We don't have purview, as far as I understand, for residential design review. And let me know if that's off. So I have a hard time opposing this. I completely understand and respect the opinions, and I appreciate everyone sharing. But I also put myself in the position of the property owners, and I have a hard time objecting to this.
All right, well said. And for what it's worth, I do echo the thoughts that we understand that it can be a difficult process, and I don't look at this as anyone attempting to do anything, for the wrong reasons or anything like that. We appreciate your being with us and bearing with us as we debate and discuss, and in the end, I hope you end up in a fabulous home. So, how about a motion?
Mr. Chairman, in order to move this forward, I move approval of PL 190060, the 13th Street residents with the conditions approved for approval as outlined in our packet.
All right, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico. Do I hear a second?
Second. Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Amorosi. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And opposed, if any? And the motion passes 4-3. All right, so that concludes our normal agenda items. Ms. Dasgupta, do you wish to apprise us of future applications?
Yes, Chair Lyon and Commission members. As of today, and we will finalize the agenda tomorrow, so we'll know more. But as of today, we do have 9 items on the agenda, including the minutes. For the May 14th agenda, we would have a request for a development plan review for new 3-story multifamily residential development with 11 units at 1436 South Terrace Road. We would also have a request for a development plan review for 12,479 square foot of building addition at 1625 West 3rd Street. We also have a request for a use permit for a community garden at Erhat Park Community Garden at 4000 South Evergreen Road. A request for 2 use permits to allow restaurant and retail uses on 1803 East Rio Salado Parkway. This is an adaptive reuse. A request for a use permit to a standard to reduce the side yard building setback by 20% at 7918 South Juniper Street. A request for a use permit to allow a second-hand store or Once Upon a Child store located at 1628 East Southern Avenue. A request for a use permit standard to increase building height by 10%, as well as a development plan review for 19 additional single-family attached units at 225 South Roosevelt Street. And a request for a zoning map amendment, a plan area development, and a development plan review for single-family residentials consisting of 13 affordable micro homes for Tempe Micro Estates at 1443 South Rita Lane. And as a reminder, staff would like to start the study session at 5 o'clock, the next meeting, in order to have enough time to present the Urban Core Master Plan as well as the TOD ordinance.
All right, thank you. Unless I've missed something, we are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.